was in a mess. Chucky said he'd been possessed, but my mommy said that he was off his rocker. So I asked my pal the shrink just to see what he would think. And the doctor said the whole case was a shock. Well, Chucky finally met his match, and it all ended in a flash. Now he won't be back at terrorizing people. This is the end, my friend. On that you can depend. But you never know, there still might be a sequel. C-H-U-C-K, why don't you come out and play? Listen up, fool, I'll tell you why. 'Cause Chucky's bad, that ain't no lie.
Chucky, Chucky, go away. You're too rough when you play.
Over in the corner now, peekaboo. Howdy, howdy, I see you.
C-H-U-C-K, why don't you come out and play?
C-V-5-5-4-4-4, my name's Chucky, baby, here I come.
Ollie, Ollie, oxen free. Drupal love or take green green.
Here I come now, ready or not. I'm gonna get you no matter what.
Mommy says you practice voodoo. You practice voodoo.
3 more day, oh doom bala. Give me power.
Chucky, Chucky, it's the end. Gee, I thought you were my friend.
Heidi, Heidi, ha ha ha. My name's Chucky and I'm a star.
Chucky, Chucky, don't you lie. Cross your heart and hope to
I
die.
see you laughing, you think it's funny. Well, I'll show you who's the real dummy.
C-H-U-C-K, why don't you come out and play?
Listen up, fool, I'll tell you why. 'Cause Chucky's bad, that ain't no lie.
C-H-U-C-K, why don't you come out and play?
Over in the corner now, peekaboo. Heidi, Heidi, ha ha, I see you.
Tonight's upload is brought to you by our patrons from the Patreon page. That's Cecilia Spears, Hawaii, Carl Leakins, Catherine McClear, Sean Campbell, Aaron Alexa, Allison Seib, Ryan Woodward, TikTok12, Bree, Bonanza Jellybean, and Kai Antez. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel through Patreon. And if anybody listening right now enjoys the content of the 80 Slasher Librarian YouTube channel and would like to help keep it going and growing for a long time to come, then click the link in the description below and sign up on Patreon for as low as $2 to $5 per month. You get some great rewards depending on the tier you select, such as the $2 tier gets you the early access content, the $5 tier gets you the early access plus a free ebook emailed to you every 3 months, and every 12 months you get a free gift from the merch store. There's also a $15 tier that gets you a free gift from the merch store every 6 months, a free ebook every 3 months, and you can appear on the podcast and voice a character in an audiobook narration once per month. So there's many choices to choose from. Just click the Patreon link in the description below and check it out. Child's Play 2, The Novelization, Chapter 9. Kyle got to Andy's room first. She went to the doorknob. She twisted it, but the door didn't open. Shit, she thought, it's locked. She still heard the kid screaming from inside the bedroom, and it made her back away from the door, as if whatever had him inside could get her, too. She knocked.
Andy? You okay? Are you...
Then Phil was there. "What the hell?" he said.
He cried out. But his door is locked.
Kyle said. She watched Phil try the doorknob, twisting it violently left and right. "Phil," Joanne said, coming up next to her husband, touching his arm. "Can't you get it open?" Phil pounded on the door some more and said, "Andy? Andy, open up, buddy." But the kid just kept screaming. Then Kyle thought of the sound she had heard outside, down in the driveway. At least she thought it was outside. Phil tried ramming the door again, sending his big body crashing into it. It didn't budge. He backed up and ran harder at it. Andy's screaming only seemed to swell as Phil banged into the door. "Hurry!" Joanne yelled. But Kyle could see that Phil's charging the door wasn't getting anywhere. She ran back to her room and snatched a nail file off her night table. She could hear Andy screaming through the walls. She ran back to the door.
Let me try,
she said, inserting herself between Phil and the door. Phil stopped for a moment and said, "Where did you learn how to do that?" But she just kept working the file into the lock, flicking it left and right. She began to think it wasn't going to work. Phil put his hands on her shoulders to move her away, and just then she heard a click. and threw open the door. Kyle watched them try to comfort Andy a few minutes later. Phil and Joanne were all smiles, patting Andy's forehead, which was sopping. They kept trying to pull the blankets down from his neck, but Andy held them tight, his fingers locked on the satiny edge. "Andy, it's all right," Joanne cooed.
No, it's not. That kid is one scared little puppy.
Kyle thought to herself. He was shaking as if he were feverish. Phil stood up. The head of the household looked confused by the whole thing. "You're fine," Joanne said to Andy. "You just had a scary old nightmare, that's all." Andy's fingers stayed locked on the blanket.
I started to dreaming about Chucky again. He tried to take my soul. He came back.
Oh, great.
Thought Kyle.
I know who this kid is now. He's that real nutcase. The kid who thought his doll came to life and killed people. While it's more than likely he did it. Well, isn't this pleasant?
She thought. She turned to leave the room, while Phil knelt by the door to examine the damage she had done to the lock. "He's here," thought Chucky. "The little brat is here. Why, that's his room down at the end of the hall." And there were other voices he heard. He edged closer, sticking to the wall, staying as low as possible. He knew he couldn't stay there. He knew he can't stay upstairs either. He had to figure something out. He was closer, almost at the pull of light that spilled through the doorway. He heard Andy say his name.
Chucky, coming to get me.
"Well, kiddo, you got that right on the money," Chucky thought. Andy saw Phil looking at the lock, shaking his head, and then looking over at him. Joanne sat with Andy, rubbing his brow, talking quietly to him. Her hand felt cool and nice, but Phil was shaking his head. "That lock," he said, pointing to it as if Andy didn't know which lock, "was worth $50. He looked right at Andy. "That's what it will cost me to replace it." Phil stood up and walked back to the bed. The man scratched his head and looked down at Andy. "Andy, why did you lock the door?" "He's not going to want to hear this," Andy thought. "He won't like what I say." Andy looked at Joanne. She smoothed his hair. Andy took a breath.
So, Chucky couldn't get in.
He heard Kyle laugh. "But honey," Joanne said, "you know that was all in your imagination, remember? It was just a nightmare." Andy decided he shouldn't say anything. He saw Phil shake his head. He was upset, and Andy knew that Joanne was the only one who wanted him to stay here. Phil cleared his throat. "From now on, you leave the doors unlocked, deal?" Andy nodded. "Now I'm going back to bed." Andy was glad to watch Phil leave. He looked at Kyle. She shook her head as if agreeing with Phil and then walked out as well. Andy grabbed onto Joanne's hand hard.
Don't leave me.
He said. "Don't worry," she said gently. "I'll stay here as long as you want me to, Andy." The man, Mr. Straight Arrow Suburbanite, walked out of the room and into another bedroom. Then a girl followed him, going into the next room just up from Andy's. Chucky watched her. Even in her blousy nightgown, she looked good. Very tasty. Of course, he thought, it's been a while, and I don't have the apparatus I once had. And that made him think of other things he liked to do to women. Things that even Chucky could do with his little arms and little hands. Necks aren't so big. Not so big at all. The mother was staying with Andy, calming him down. That's too bad, Chucky thought. Too damn bad. He edged a few steps closer, and then waited. In the room, Joanne smiled at Andy, thinking he was too beautiful a boy to be scared. But after what he'd been through, and being in a new strange place while it's storming, she understood.
I miss my mother,
Andy said. Joanne nodded as she picked up the photo of Andy's mother. She was pretty, and Joanne felt a terrible jab of envy. I know you do, honey, Joanne said.
Will I ever see her again?
Joanne laughed, trying to make it sound as if that was an absurd question. Of course you will, Andy. As if to seal the answer, she gave him a great hug. I promise. For the first time since he woke up screaming, she saw Andy smile. Chucky was thinking that he couldn't just walk past the room. He couldn't stand out there. Someone might come out in the hall, going to the bathroom or to the fridge for Twinkies. They would see him. He knew he had to just walk past the kids' room and find somewhere to lay low. I gotta just keep moving so they won't see me, he thought. I gotta stay in the shadows. He nodded to himself, getting ready, and then he moved as fast as his little good guy sneakers would take him. He didn't look in the room. If anyone had happened to look out, all they would have seen was a red and blue blur, topped with a bright red mop. I should dye this stupid hair, he thought. It's like a fucking traffic light. He kept on going, back down the stairs now. He had to reach up and hold onto the banister. It was like being 5 years old again. It was dark down there, nice and dark, so he could figure out his next move. At the bottom of the stairs, he saw the living room to his left, and he kept on running. He turned around, checking the foyer, checking that no one was following him. He backed into a big easy chair. Shit, he hissed, startled. He spun around and was looking at a mirror image of himself, but not quite. This good guy doll was bone dry, and his hair sat squarely on his head. The doll's eyes blinked, then it spoke.
Hi, I'm Tommy, and I'm your friend.
Chucky reached back and slugged the doll on its puffy cheeks, hissing to it, Shut up, you idiot. Chapter 10.
What was that? I heard something from downstairs.
Andy said, shooting up from his pillow. He's so scared, Joanne thought, absolutely terrified. And for the first time, she began to think that maybe Andy Barclay might be more than she could handle. It's nothing, Joanne said. There's nobody here, she cooed, and nobody's gonna hurt you. Andy looked at the door and then to her face, searching for some kind of reassurance. She gently pushed against his shoulders. And now it's time you went back to sleep, Andy. Downstairs, Chucky had given the doll his best shot, a real good slug. Too good. It cartwheeled backward over the arm of the chair. When its head hit the front of the brick fireplace, Chucky heard a sharp crack, and then a thud as it plopped forward onto the wooden floor. And then the doll started to talk.
I like to be hugged. I like to be hugged. I like to be hugged.
Over and over those same stupid words in that goddamn whining voice. Chucky turned and looked over his shoulder. He heard someone coming, and he figured they're all going to come storming down the stairs and see him there and wonder how they ended up with two good guy dolls. But he'd have to explain that one of them wasn't so good.
I like to be hugged. I like to be hugged.
A car passed outside, turning onto the block, and milk-white light shot into the room. Chucky saw a stand with fireplace tools on the other side of the hearth. He ran over and pulled out the poker and raised it into the air. Hug this. he said. He brought it smashing down on Tommy's head. But the plastic head was hard, and though Chucky smashed the poker right on its forehead, he made only a small crack. He raised the poker into the air. Grunting, he brought it down again and again and again, until finally he didn't hear Tommy's voice. He brought the poker way back for one last blow, hard enough to smash that face into 1,000 bits. But the curved hook of the poker caught the table near the chair. The table tilted, and Chucky heard something roll off. He turned and saw a statue falling through the air. He watched it hit the floor and shatter into bits. Chucky froze, and again he listened for movement on the stairs. But it was still quiet up there, so he turned his attention back to Tommy. He wasn't human, Chucky thought. It wasn't the same as doing in a real-life person. It lacked that special thrill, that je ne sais quoi, but he didn't like leaving any job unfinished. He gave the doll one final smash to the head. I must be working out my hostilities, Chucky thought. I must have a lot of pent-up anger for good guy dolls. Can't imagine why. He walked over to the doll and gave it a kick to the stomach. It rolled over, exposing its back. Chucky leaned over the doll and pulled up the t-shirt. He undid the latch to the battery compartment and took out the 2 batteries. Then he thought, time to dispose of the corpse. He stood there perfectly still, listening. He heard the rain and thunder still coming down, the pings of the drops against the windows. God damn, it's still raining, he thought. Looks like I'll have to go outside. He grabbed Tommy by the doll's ankles and started dragging it out of the living room. He was nearly to the foyer when he heard the footsteps. Someone was coming down. He stood there holding the doll by its feet. He looked around the room as the footsteps grew louder and closer. Another car went down the street, sending an arc of light slicing through the room. He saw the couch, and he gave Tommy a quick kick, sending the doll rolling under it, just as someone came into the room. Chucky let himself go wide-eyed, doing his best to impersonate the deceased Tommy, but he could see who came in and turned on a light. It was Kyle. She walked over to the couch. Chucky wished he could turn and check that the doll was hidden completely under it, but Kyle stopped and, seeing Chucky in her path, reached down and grabbed the doll. She threw him into the air, and the room became a spinning blur as Chucky turned over and over until he landed headfirst next to the TV. He tried to let his body slump into a position that would let him keep watching Kyle to see if she spotted Tommy. Then Chucky noticed something really bad. A bit of Tommy's foot, a bit of his red sneaker was sticking out from under the sofa, and Kyle went and sat on the couch, just there, right over the foot. She put a small bottle on the coffee table, nail polish, and then she put her feet on the edge of the table. She picked up the remote and turned on the TV. He heard sounds, shrill voices from the speaker behind him. He couldn't see the picture, not without moving, not without coming to life. And I can't do that, he thought. People were jabbering at each other. It was a talk show, some stupid-ass talk show. He watched Kyle screw open the nail polish. She pulled out the small brush and wrinkled her toes. She was looking down. Damn it, he thought. She's going to see the sneaker and pull it out, and then she'll see the smashed head. She'll look at me. She'll remember Andy's crazy story. And maybe then she'll scream. She'll get up and run. And I can't let that happen. He looked around for something he could use on the girl. Something that would be quick and effective. There was the poker, that might work. But there might be something better around. Maybe a letter opener, maybe something smaller, sharper. The girl started dabbing her toes. He watched her lick her lips, concentrating as each little piggy got a new sheen of pink. He was thinking about what he would like to do with her little piggies, what color he'd like to paint them. How about red? She put one foot down on the floor, the one she wasn't working on, and Chucky saw it land right next to Tommy's foot. Oh, she's gonna see it now, he thought. There's no way she'll miss it now. He heard himself moan. It just escaped him. He watched her face to see if she had heard him, but she had this show, Arsenio Hall, turned up too loud. I just have to get her, he thought. Just got to move, and... The poker was within his reach. It was only inches away, where he had dropped it after rearranging Tommy's face. Only inches away. He started leaning, ever so slowly, in that direction, while he kept his eyes on Kyle, who seemed glued to her work. He moved his arm, extending the fingers. I should feel it now, he thought. He touched wood, air, but no poker. He risked moving his eyes, those noisy, mechanical eyes, just a little bit, to see where his little hand was and where the hell the poker was. He saw that he would have to lean to the left just a bit more. He moved his body, even though if Kyle looked up now, he knew she would spot him, no doubt about it. But then he felt the metal grip of the poker, and Chucky thought, now we're in business, sports fans. Kyle! It was Phil calling from upstairs, and then louder. Kyle, shut off the TV and go to bed! Chucky froze. He heard Kyle sigh. She put down her nail polish and screwed the brush cap back into place. She zapped the TV and cut off Arsenio's first guest, the virtuous Jessica Hahn. My kind of lady, Chucky thought, back when I was active. And then Kyle stood up, and Chucky, his hand still on the poker, watched her painted foot land right next to the small sneaker. He thought she might feel it. She has to feel the sneaker. But Kyle just walked out of the room, shutting off the light on the way. Chucky released his grip on the poker. Just as Kyle was about to enter the foyer, she stopped. She shook her head as if something confused her, something out of place. Maybe she noticed I'm not where she tossed me, thought Chucky. How good are her powers of observation? She came back into the dark living room, heading right for the coffee table. Chucky kept watching her. When she got to the table, she snatched up the nail polish that she'd forgotten, and then she turned. She was looking right at him. He felt her eyes studying him. I'm not in the same position, he knew. He wasn't where he had landed when she tossed him. She can see that, even in the darkness. The poker is just there, he reminded himself. Just there. I just have to reach out, pick it up, and... But then he saw her shake her head again, discounting the thought. She turned and walked out to the foyer and on up the stairs. And, thought Chucky, she'll never know how lucky she was. Lucky, that is, this time. Because next time, as Jim Morrison said, no one gets out of here alive. He dragged the doll's body out to the kitchen. Bits of its plastic skull flaked, leaving a trail tracing back to the living room. I can get that later, Chucky thought. Some exposed metal part of the head screeched against the linoleum, so Chucky moved more slowly as he got closer to the side door. When he got to the door, he undid the chain. Then he unhooked the bolt while holding Tommy with one hand. When he opened the door, he was met with a blast of rain that dotted the floor. I'll have to clean this up, too, he thought. He pulled the doll through the door, outside, and then down the steps. He could see the backyard, the fence running around the outside of the property, a wooden swing hanging from a tree for all the brats that the Simpsons like to take in. This grass was thick everywhere back there, everywhere but under the swing. He dragged the body over and dropped it there. He looked around for something to dig with. He saw a small metal shed, the type that suburban types like to store their leaf blowers and their power mowers in, and, he thought, if I'm lucky, a shovel. He ran over there, getting wet again, his sneakers soaked through. He had to tug the metal door of the shed open. It groaned, but the loud wrenching noise was swallowed by a distant rumble of thunder. The storm was finally receding. Right inside the door he found a shovel, a giant mother of a shovel. He grabbed it and ran back to the doll. It was splattered by mud. Big muddy drops were sent flying up by the rain. Chucky dug, grunting and muttering to himself. "It won't be long now," he thought. "Not long at all." The dirt was hard, and he had to jab at it, cursing it, breaking up clumps. He hit rocks and saw a tiny spark erupt when his shovel blade met stone. But he kept at it until he thought he had a hole big enough in which to bury Tommy. Just big enough. He threw the shovel to the side and grabbed the doll by its foot. The sneaker came off in his hand. "Shit," he said. He grabbed at the ankle with the red and white striped sock, and he pulled the doll into the hole. It was shallow. The doll would be barely covered. But it would be good enough, he thought. After all, it doesn't have to last for long. Just until I'm all done here. Maybe 24 hours tops. As he shoveled the loose dirt back on top of the doll, Chucky thought of the last time he had buried something this small. It had been raining that night, too. "Can you believe it?" he thought. "Always burying things in the rain." He covered the smashed face first, filling in all of its cracks and craters with the mud. Of course, she had been a bit bigger than the doll, but not much. Not too much. He looked over his shoulder. He checked the Simpson house for any lights coming on. "I've got to clean up," he thought. "Take care of the mess. Make everything neat and tidy for Phil and Joanne. And for Andy. I don't want Andy suspecting." He started covering the body. Yeah, she had been a little bigger than this, and shit, did anyone get the irony? Did anyone else besides himself see the irony of this whole thing? The doll was invisible now, covered with dirt, but Chucky went on shoveling, getting it good and covered. And he remembered. Yes, Mom had been a small woman. Real small. Just under 4 feet tall. A midget. Not a dwarf, she corrected people, always very sweetly, very nicely, as if she hadn't been suffering from a lifetime of snickering people. "I'm a midget," she would say. And Charles Lee Ray lived in dread that he'd grow up to be a midget too. When that didn't happen, he still had to deal with the questions from the kids on the south side. "How come your mama's so short, Charlie? What's the matter? Your daddy only get his dick in halfway?" And they'd laugh and laugh. It was so funny to them. So damn funny. He looked down at the dirt. He couldn't see Tommy anymore. Chucky just stood there thinking. Those kids didn't know the half of it. They thought he was just embarrassed having a midget for a mom. But he always knew he was going to kill his mother. It was just a matter of time. No, there never had been any question about that. Chapter 11. Her name was Minna Elizabeth Ray, but the people who knew her called her Mrs. Ray. When Charles Ray was very young, he didn't have any idea there was something different about his mother, something odd. When you're very little, you don't see people staring. You don't see kids snickering. You don't hear people whispering. It was only when he got older and bigger, when he started to grow, that he noticed something. His mother was short, very short. She had always seemed big to him, like any parent, he guessed. But he saw now that she was only inches taller than he was. And soon after he graduated from 3rd grade, Chucky passed her in height. That's when things got bad. He never knew his father, but he had heard a lot about him. Minna called him a big rat, a big good-for-nothing rat, a big slob, a slob without a heart. And Chucky understood, from his mom's use of the word big from very early on, that his father had been normal-sized. But Chucky never saw him to verify that fact. There were no photos, just his mother's endless rants. Though she smiled up at all the big people she had to deal with, at the stores, the neighbors, everyone, her face would darken when she turned away. It would darken, turn evil, and Chucky would lie awake scared as he listened to his mother outside in their apartment's tiny living room, drinking and talking to herself. And then Chucky grew taller. He was becoming one of the big people, and that was not a good thing. She started yammering at him all the time, nagging him about his room, his lousy grades at school, the way he dressed. And soon she started talking about him and his father in the same way. "Your father was a big nothing, and that's all you'll be." And she started to hit him, lashing out for no reason. First, just one blow, then more, until she sent a rain of gnarled fists crashing down on him. He learned how to cover his head and protect himself. He learned to stay out of sight when she started making bottle and glass noises in the kitchen. He learned to hate the woman. The kids in school were great, just super. Not a day passed that they didn't taunt him about his dwarf mother. They called her the little woman. "Couldn't be your mother, Ray," they'd laugh. "You're too big to come out of that such a small put." It was just another reason to hate her. But every day he grew bigger and stronger, and he started to make plans. At first he thought he'd run away, but where? He had no money, no relatives he knew about. Where could he go? Then he began to see her size as an advantage. He could laugh now when she started smacking at his head. He got so good he could dodge her blows while she shrieked, spittle flying from her puppet mouth right at his face. "Don't you laugh at me, you horrible boy! You ugly boy!" And then she'd try to work in some more blows, yelling and screaming. "Don't you laugh!" She's so small, he saw, small enough that he could lift her. There was a park across the street. Nobody played there or walked there too much. The kids at school said it was a drug hangout. But Ray looked down at the park at night. He saw the shadowy shapes moving around, and the occasional glint of their eyes looking around, looking up at him. Charles Lee Ray suspected that a whole lot of interesting things went on down there. A whole lot. He found himself grabbing the windowsill, gripping it hard. He felt the wood give, almost crumble under his fingers. He saw those eyes down below, as if they were waiting for him to play with them. He looked at the claw marks his hands made in the wood, and he knew what he was going to do. He waited until she was drunk, staggering around the living room, the kitchen. He walked up behind her. She was muttering to herself, didn't even see him coming. She held a big grape jelly tumbler filled with some cheap scotch. He thought that he'd just grab her and do it, but that wasn't good enough. She hates me, he thought, for being normal. She hates me, and I have to let her know that I hate her too. "Mom," he had said gently, then smirking. "Mommy?" She turned, looking at his stomach, then, blinking, up to his face. "What do you want?" she said, the words a long slur. As she stood there wobbling, her face looking at his, he saw a glint of recognition bloom in her eyes. She knows she's in trouble, Chucky thought. He flexed his fingers, and he loved that look of horror in her eyes, that terrible, terrible look. It was wonderful. "Mom," he said gently. He reached out and wrapped his hands around her neck. He closed her throat with his hands. She gagged, her eyes bulged out, and then he was enjoying himself much too much. He eased up, giving her just the tiniest teasing breath of air before whomp, slamming his hand shut again, closing down the air pipe. He was strong and she was light, and he found he could even pull her off her feet, letting her kick the air. Up and down he jerked her. Her nails scratched at his hands. She tried to kick him, But then came the first of many wonderful moments for Charles Lee Ray. She stopped struggling. She hung there in his arms, a lifeless doll. He carried her across the street, stuffed inside a big lawn bag. He grunted, carrying her down the steps. She seemed much heavier, dead. Then he dragged his way over to the park, to a lamppost with a light that he saw was out. It was black there, and he wasn't scared of being caught. He wasn't scared of anyone trying to do something to him. Because if they do, he thought, I'll just open my bag and say, "See this? Come near me and you can be next." He had a wonderful sense of peace and strength whenever he was young, and to this day, a side benefit of killing his mom at that moment, he guessed. He buried her deep, using a small spade. It took most of the night. Some crackheads strolled by to watch, but they kept on moving when they saw him glaring at them, when they saw the bag. He went back to the apartment feeling free. He was eventually caught, of course. His great plan was filled with arrows that pointed right to his nasty murder. Dogs found her body. Nobody came to the little witch's funeral, except for Chucky. The youth officer said it would look good. He was sent to the Spofford, Illinois juvenile home. No jail, no trial. How could there be? He smiled, thinking about it. I was only 13 years old. Only 13 years old. I was young. I had my whole life ahead of me. And we all make mistakes, don't we? The rain stopped. Chucky had to clean up, put the shovel away, get back to the living room, because tomorrow was going to be a big day. A really big day. He looked up at Andy's bedroom. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Child's Play 2, the novelization of the movie. I gotta say, all the extra stuff in these chapters was awesome. I think that's why I did a much longer upload than I've done so far of this book. That, and I didn't have to do a whole lot of cutting and pasting of the other voice actors. By the way, great job to our patrons, our $15 patrons, Bonanza Jellybean and Cecilia Spears, for doing awesome as Kyle and as Andy. Really enjoy having you guys voicing these characters. It's been a lot of fun. And, we're only like halfway through the book, so there's plenty more to come, guys. But yeah, one thing I gotta say, I don't know if there's any other Smallville fans out there. If you're listening to this right now and you've seen the TV show Smallville, and if you're a big fan of it, then you had to that part where it said that Chucky was nothing more than a red and blue blur. It made me think of like season 6 and 7 and 8 of Smallville when they were calling him the red blue blur in Metropolis. That's what they were calling Clark, because they couldn't call him Superman yet. But anyways, back to the book. I really dug the scene, all the insight into Chucky. Just whenever he was in the house, the way he was worried about getting caught, and was Kyle figuring out what was going on. That was cool. Andy and Joanne's relationship, I think, is a little more sincere in the book than it is in the movie, or at least it comes off more sincere in the book. But I think the big thing about tonight's chapter that a lot of you caught, that's really cool extra story, which actually took up all of chapter 11, was the backstory on Charles Lee Ray killing his mother, and that his mother was a dwarf. That just caught me off guard. I was like, wow, this is really awesome that we're actually getting some backstory on Charles Lee Ray back whenever he was a damn kid. And I cannot wait to hear what you guys thought of that information and that backstory and that insight. Because, that's the kind of things we get with these novelizations that make them so great and so much fun to narrate. Sure, we've seen the movies 100 times if we're hardcore horror fans. But the novelizations have the opportunity, and a lot of these books do it, to add to the story, to expand the story. And man, I'm really enjoying Child's Play 2 because this author is doing just the right amount of it. And even more so, tonight was awesome. So yeah, guys, hit me up in the comments section. Let me know what you thought of that backstory, what you thought of the 3 chapters tonight, and what you think of the book so far. And I'll be back very soon with more of Child's Play 2. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and you can't keep a good guy down.